Hey everyone, welcome back. So if you've been paying attention in the security world lately, things have been a little rough, and I wanted to take some time today to talk about what's been happening, why it matters specifically to people like us in the self-hosting community, and some things that you can actually do about it without needing to be a security expert. Because honestly, when I first started digging into some of this stuff, it was equal parts frustrating and terrifying. And I think a lot of you probably feel the same way. So let's dig into this a little bit. So what's happening right now? So in just the last little bit, we've seen a string of supply chain attacks that have targeted open source software pretty directly. And the biggest one that just happened, and I mean like just happened, is the Axios attack. And if you're not familiar, Axios is one of the most popular JavaScript packages in existence. We're talking like 300 million downloads every single week. Someone compromised a maintainer account, published 2 malicious versions, and for about 3 hours, anyone who ran a fresh install got a remote access Trojan dropped onto their machine. Windows, Mac, Linux, all 3 platforms were targeted here. And the scary part is the malware is sophisticated enough to self-delete after installation, so you wouldn't even know it was there. And before that, we had the light LLM attack and the Trivia attack, which are connected in a particularly nasty way. Trivia is a security scanning tool, something people use to check for vulnerabilities in their software. When you compromise the scanner itself, you're not just attacking one service. You're potentially blinding people to other attacks, and that's a qualitatively different level of threat. Now, I want to be clear about something here. These aren't random accidents. These are deliberate, sophisticated attacks against the open source ecosystem. And honestly, that stings a little when you're someone like me who genuinely believes in open source software and relies on the community that builds it. So here's the thing about the self-hosting community that makes this particularly uncomfortable. Our whole ethos is built around trust in open source, and we self-host because we want control and transparency and independence, and the idea that the tools enabling that independence can be turned against us is genuinely unsettling. And we're at a disadvantage compared to enterprise environments in a pretty real way. A company with a dedicated security team can mandate strict dependency controls, run internal package mirrors, monitor every outbound network connection. And we're largely doing this solo. Most of us don't have a security operations center watching our home lab at 2 a.m. when our automated jobs run. But here's what I want you to hold on to. The people doing this are a tiny minority, and the community response to these incidents has been fast. The Axios malicious versions were detected within 6 minutes and pulled within 3 hours. The write-ups appeared the same day, and people warned each other. And that's the open source community working the way it's supposed to. These attackers are parasites on an ecosystem they didn't build. That doesn't make the threat less real, but it is worth remembering. Okay, so now let's talk about some practical stuff. And I want to be upfront here. I'm not going to give you a 20-step technical checklist because most of us aren't going to implement enterprise-grade security controls in our home labs. What I want to talk about are realistic mindset shifts and habits that actually move the needle. I know what I'm about to say here may be controversial to a lot of people, and that's fine. We can all handle things in our home labs the way that best suits our needs, but I prefer Docker images over direct installs, and this is probably the single most practical thing for a lot of self-hosters, and I know a lot of you are already doing this. When you pull a pre-built Docker image from a reputable source rather than running an npm install or a pip install yourself, you're somewhat insulated from the specific class of attacks that we saw with Axios. Look, it's not a perfect solution, but it's a meaningful layer of protection. To go along with using Docker containers, using pinned versions can actually be a big step in helping prevent your system from being attacked. The Axios attack required pulling a fresh install during a specific window. People running pinned versions who weren't actively updating during that window were completely untouched. Using latest in your compose files is convenient, but it's also an implicit agreement to accept whatever gets published, including malicious versions. You should probably get in the habit, and I'm guilty of this as well, of pinning specific versions and being deliberate about when and why you update your services. Now, basically nobody can track every vulnerability or supply chain incident, but if you're following a handful of good security-focused accounts or creators who surface this stuff, you're likely to hear about major incidents within hours, and the Community Information Network actually works really well when people are plugged into it, which is part of the reason I wanted to make this specific video. Now, this one should be kind of a no-brainer for a lot of people, but I do want to bring it up because you should know what's running on your systems. I mean, not necessarily at a code level, but at a service level. If something weird starts happening, being able to say, I'm running these specific services and nothing else, is your starting point for investigating. A lot of us accumulate services over time and honestly lose track of what's actually running. And I think it's important that we accept that perfect security isn't necessarily the goal here. And this is actually kind of a pretty important one, I think. You're not going to eliminate risk entirely, and trying to do so will make your home lab miserable to run. The goal is to make yourself a harder target than average and recover quickly if something does go wrong. Regular backups, knowing how to rebuild from scratch, keeping sensitive credentials out of environments that don't need them, that resilience matters more than trying to achieve perfect security. Now, I want to talk about something that's specific to a lot of the people in this community, and that's running Proxmox with a mix of VMs and LXCs, because I think a lot of self-hosters are doing this, and it's worth talking about from a security standpoint. Running individual services in separate LXCs and VMs is actually important for security, at least in my opinion. If one service gets compromised, it has a much harder time reaching your other services, and that blast radius reduction is real and meaningful. But there's one thing I want to flag that a lot of people may overlook, and that's when you set up an LXC in Proxmox, there's a setting called unprivileged. And unprivileged LXCs add an important security layer. Root inside the container gets mapped to a non-root user in the host, being Proxmox in this case. Now, privileged LXCs don't have that protection, which means a container escape could potentially give an attacker access to your Proxmox host itself, which of course would be very, very bad. Go check your LXCs now or after this video. If any of them are set to privileged and there's no specific technical reason that they need to be, things like hardware pass-through, that's worth fixing. The migration process means creating a new unprivileged LXC and moving your data over, but for most services, it's not actually a heavy lift to do that. And I'll be honest with you, I went and checked my own setup while putting this video together, and I found that my VaultWarden, my password manager, the thing my wife and I use every day to store our credentials, was running as a privileged container. And that's on me. That was an oversight that I made when I originally set it up and never went back to correct. And it's exactly that kind of thing that's easy to miss when you're spinning up services and just trying to get things working. So if that's you too, don't beat yourself up, but definitely fix it. Look, I know that this can be a lot to take in, and I know it's frustrating. It's frustrating for me too. We got into self-hosting because we love this stuff and we believe in the open source community. And having to think about bad actors trying to exploit that community isn't fun for anyone. But I want to leave you with this. The fact that you're watching videos like this, that you're engaged with this community, that you care enough to understand what's running in your home lab, that already puts you ahead of most people. Security isn't about being perfect. It's about being informed and making reasonable decisions with what you know. And while what I've talked about here isn't necessarily be-all, end-all solution to self-hosting security, and it wasn't meant to be, I'd love to know what other tips you've got to help stay safe down in the comment section below. And if you'd like me to put together a video walking through one way, at least, to migrate your data to a new unprivileged container, let me know in the comments. If there's enough interest, I'll do what I can to make sure that that happens. And if you found this video helpful, hit the like button. It genuinely helps more than you might realize. Also, let me know in the comments, are you running any privileged LXCs? And did you know about the Axios attack? I'm curious about where people are with their understanding of some of this stuff. I'd love to know more from you guys. But that said, I'm going to wrap this up. I want to thank you guys for spending a few minutes of your day with me here today, and I'll talk to you in the next video.